For England we keep faith for all that is done and said. We know their dream, enough to know they dreamed and are dead. And what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? I write it out in a verse. MacDonagh and McBride and Connolly and Pierce, now and in time to be, wherever green is worn, are changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born.
Born in the townland of Knockacullion, on the Slieve Bay range of mountains and in the parish of Tadavnet, Seamus McElwaine was born into an area steeped in tradition, an area steeped in particular in the tradition of resistance to British rule in Ireland. There was nothing easy in Tadavnet. This was hard country, hard land, hard worked. It was an area of massive emigration. It was an area where the worst effects of partition were to be seen. Many families fled the land, their places taken by the drab and depressing sameness of conifer forests along the sides of the mountain. Seamus understood the reasons for all of this. Seamus took the war to the British. At one time it was said the soldiers operating along the border were so afraid of him that they carried a picture on the butt of their rifles of Seamus McElwaine. He was the most feared volunteer of the past 30 years in the South Fermanagh region.
First time I met Seamus McElwaine, I think it was 1977. It was at a meeting in Clonus that we had been brought to. It was a fairly large meeting of mostly volunteers from the South Fermanagh and Monaghan end. And whilst he didn't say much, I didn't know who he was. He looked so young, this person. I thought that somebody had brought their young son with them, just they had no babysitter or anything. But Seamus didn't speak that night. But afterwards, he called a number of us together. He picked out a number of us, and we had a talk in the next room. And he said to us, he says, I want to get to know the people who are involved in the area. He says, I was watching the mood of the meeting, and there are problems there, and there are personality problems. So I thought to myself, well, this young guy wasn't asleep at the meeting. He was actually rationalising what was going on. He was taking in what everybody was saying. He was actually making judgments on certain people. Because this meeting that was brought together, it was about problems in the area, problems of why certain things weren't happening and certain other things were happening. So he picked out a number of people, which was including myself, to have a talk afterwards with us and say that he would like to meet us in the following days and weeks. And from then on, that was our first meeting with Seamus McElwaine, and from then on he became very important person in the struggle for the next number of years, right up to his death. My own views that night after meeting him was that here was a guy who was actually going to have leadership qualities about him. He was actually very, very young, and he had actually been in the Republican movement for a number of months, and possibly joined, I later heard, he joined the Republican movement at 16, and he had told people his wrong age so that he wouldn't have to wait any longer, so he'd become a member of the Republican movement. But in the months and years after meeting Seamus, he became very, very active within the South Fermanagh area, and particularly with those who he thought was also people that he could work with and who could make a difference and who were also very active. And he became very well known to us all throughout all of Fermanagh, particularly in the early years of the late 1970s and the beginning 1980. Seamus was then arrested on the 14th of March 1980, and it was a major blow to the border regions of Fermanagh along the Cavan-Leitrim borders, where Seamus had already become one of the key leaders in the area. By this time he had become a target for the British Armed Forces, who he was enemy number one in the area, and he had inflicted huge damage on the British establishment in Ireland at a very young age, and he became a key member of the command staff in the area. But Seamus was a man of action, there was no doubt about it. Day and night he would be torturing areas. What can we do? We need to do something. He would actually, each day he'd be looking for something to do. So he became a very, very enthusiastic person, and those around him, unless they were in the same frame of mind, he didn't want to know anybody who was prepared to be lazy or anything like that.
The first time I would have seen Seamus would have been in a school bus coming when I used to live over in Knockatown. But I knew his father, who was a Sinn Féin councillor, and when the 69 trouble started, a lot of people come from Belfast and all over to his home house to get trained in different various things, you know. And Seamus would have been, from he was 9 or 10-year-old, would have seen lots of people coming to his place and would have been very aware of what was going on. Seamus stood out from anybody else because he was what you call willing to put himself forward to get something done, while most of his age group just like most areas would have been kind of just let somebody else do the driving and all that. But he was willing to go on and keep going and to be very determined to put his orders to be there when someone had to be done.
Yeah, Seamus was an exceptional individual for his age. Whilst most young people of that age, 17, 18, 19, we were running to dances, particularly at weekends. Seamus would have been organising meetings on a Sunday night without any thought of going to a dance or anything else. Whilst most of us would have been involved in the Republican movement quite a number of years, we did have a social life and we balanced both. But here was a young guy that was the exception when most young people, those who hadn't even joined the Republican struggle, were running to dances, and that's all they were interested in. Discos, drinking. Seamus did like a drink. He liked a social outing, particularly with his friends and his comrades. And he was actually good crack when he was out. But that was only on the rare occasion. He'd have been organising meetings on a Sunday night. I remember one particular Sunday night when there was 4 or 5 people trying to get away to a disco in Monaghan, and he was organising a meeting, and the meeting was running on, and he was wondering why these people were getting itchy feet. He didn't. He never thought these people wanted to go to the dance, because what was more important to him was that the meeting concluded with the results, what he wanted out of it, and that was action. I often remember him saying that he had walked 30 miles from one county, walked all the way from Leitrim to Monaghan overnight, so that he wouldn't get into a car, and he felt he was safer in the fields than he was getting into cars. And he was a very, very, very hard man on boots. I remember us buying him a pair of boots and costing him a fortune. About 3 weeks later, he had wore them out. This was about the amount of walking he was doing. He was also a person who had a great, great mind of understanding areas, and he had a map. He could read a map and go into an area and actually know the area from reading the map. I remember being in Fermanagh with him one night, and he said to me, "I think there should be a road here on the left somewhere." And now, I was from near enough the area, and I wasn't certain if there was a road. And he had said that he had seen it in the map, and true enough, there was a road. And once he went anywhere, it didn't matter if it was 30 or 40 miles away, he always remembered it when he went back. And he could go back the same path a year later, because he had a brilliant mind and remembering routes, tracks, roads, lanes, rivers. So he had to be very, very careful when he was on the run the second time, because also the guards were putting on a lot of pressure that he'd be arrested.
Pauline, you were actually going out with Seamus when he was killed on active service.
I met Seamus shortly after he escaped from Long Kesh. I was 18 years old and Seamus was 23. We basically just bumped into each other. I happened to have reason to go to a safe house in the border area, and Seamus just happened to be there, and we just seemed to hit it off. Seamus was a gentle giant of a guy. His presence just filled the room. He had the sort of presence that you walked into a room and he knew he was there. He was the guy that would sit in the back of the room, totally relaxed, laid back, and taking in the atmosphere and the crack. He had the uncanny ability of adding to a conversation by sitting in the back room. He'd lead a conversation. He'd throw in a witty, politicised remark, and he'd have all the room talking and debating and planning and focused, and Seamus would just sit back in the corner and take it all in. Everybody had so much respect and admiration for him. Here was this young guy, good looking, intelligent, skilled, field wise and prison wise, who had just escaped from Long Kesh, and he played such a big part in that escape, and he went straight back to the armed struggle along the border. Seamus was oblivious to all this admiration. He was so modest, just a unassuming character.
First of all, I got to know Seamus when I met his father one day at a commemoration. And the father invited me out to the house, and when I got there, Seamus was a very bright, intelligent young man, and he used to be taking great interest in going on in the 6 counties. And he used to be always to me about why is this happening, why should they be there at all? And I was trying to give him as good as I could the history of the partition of the country and all that. And as time went on, Seamus began to realise more and was asking more questions, different questions, more intelligent questions. And I knew at that time that Seamus was the makers of a good volunteer in the near future. Still, he was even only 12 or 13 at the time. And I came around that particular area at around that time in 1970, and I was around there near his father's area, and I stayed at a house there nearby. And I remember one day that the branch was starting to raid the places, and they started in the lower place, and Seamus, without thinking, crossed the fields as fast as he could and gave us the warning that they were raiding, so that we could get prepared and get our things ready and get out of the house. He was always an intelligent, bright, real Irishman, and I always said it was in him because his father and his mother's people were all good, solid Republicans. And I knew the day would come when Seamus would take up the struggle himself. And he indeed did do that. And for that, I had great time for him. He had the makings of a soldier, and he proved that he was a soldier.
McElwaine at Mother's Last Rush Lane. Quite a few of you here this evening knew Seamus, knew of his commitment, knew of his dedication. And probably those of us who remember him will always remember where we were on the day that Seamus.
Why I say this is, there are many young people here today who have only heard stories about Seamus. In terms of their lives, 19 years ago is a long time. But to us that knew him, it seems only like yesterday that he was killed.
The work of Fernia, locally, nationally and internationally, has been very mindful, working on behalf of the families and those who have been directly affected by state-sponsored violence, in demanding the truth from the British government on its policy of state-sponsored violence and murder. In the case of Seamus McElwaine, who this project and video is really attributed to, my work locally, nationally and internationally has been to highlight the obvious case of shoot to kill, which was an operation in this country, and it has affected the McElwaine family with the murder of Seamus McElwaine. Seamus McElwaine had 9 bullets pumped into him. 3 of them were actually pumped into him after he had been captured, and that's evident in his inquest report. When we bear all this here in mind, we realise that the British government have denied, concealed and covered up that they have had a policy of shoot to kill in operation in this country. The special branch have protected any investigation leading to prosecution of the people who have actually murdered Seamus McElwaine. And bearing in mind also the rest of the families here throughout County Fermanagh also who have been at the receiving end of shoot to kill and collusion. At a local level, we have lobbied and campaigned. We've highlighted and publicised the operation of shoot to kill with the murder of Seamus McElwaine. At a national level, everybody is aware throughout this country of the work of Fernia and their demand for the truth from the British government. And internationally, more recently in the month of December, I went along to the US and did a 10-city whistle-stop tour to people all over there, and I ended up in Washington DC on Capitol Hill giving testimony as to the role of the British government throughout this country with their operation of collusion. We've worked tirelessly on behalf of the families demanding the truth, and we will continue to do so. We had 2 family members represent the group in Brussels recently also. They were invited by Barbara de Bruin to give testimony as to how the policy of collusion has affected them and their families and their loved ones.
Well, I suppose, from the outset, my only experience of Seamus McElwaine in the initial period of meeting him was initially through prison, and then afterwards in the aftermath of the escape in 1983. So it was actually just shortly prior to the escape in 1983 from the H-Blocks that I met him, and he was on D-Wing of H7 and I was in C-Wing. And while we were actively involved, probably about 5 or 6 months in advance of the escape, putting the whole thing together, Seamus came to attention through, obviously he was going to be on the escape because of the nature of his charges and the sentence and all the rest of it. He was doing a life sentence, and I think that Bobby Story was actually dealing with him, because we discovered that the Fermanagh ones were actually on appeal, and they were to go to the appeal courts, and we discovered that they were planning an escape from the courts, which involved the smuggling in of a weapon. And Seamus was key to this, and it actually came about not by accident, but by somebody just happened to mention these lads are going to escape, and Bobby Story was actually dealing with them at the time, and went, holy Jesus, if they have a gun somewhere. And we were in the process of smuggling weapons in for this major escape. So Seamus was approached, and it was agreed that the general outline of the escape would be brought into a circle of people, because it was a very, very tight, secure, need-to-know basis. But he was very, very trustworthy, and he was a very, very quiet person. I know people describe him in a different way, but my personal experience of him was exceptionally quiet. He was very, very focused. He knew what he wanted. He was a totally dedicated soldier of the Republic, and his key focus was appeal courts or no appeal courts. He wasn't interested in what the judges were going to do. He was leaving the court by his means, so that was the plan. And also, when it was put to him that we would be doing a massive escape which would involve the entire block, he was into it right away. So in essence, the first weapon that was acquired for that escape, prior to Belfast smuggling in all the weapons that we required, Seamus McElwaine provided it. Now, my personal experience of him during that period was just sort of gone over, calling into the cell, have a bit of a yarn. Once briefing was beginning to happen and what was expected of certain individuals on the day, and key briefs being handed out, that was just talking to him now and again, just generally about the thing. But I always found him, you wouldn't have known he was in the wing. You'd have went down the list of names, you'd have went down all the names, and then names would jump out. Seamus McElwaine's name didn't jump out as how he does such and such, or he's a character, or he was quiet. reserved might not be the right way, but he was quiet in his own way. Did a lot of reading. He was he'd have been into reading stuff, you know, all the history of Irish politics and that. And I liked him from the outset. He was very friendly. He was a very warming person. Once he warmed to you, you knew you had the genuine article. You were dealing with a genuine person. And then working with him on the build up to the escape, it was easy to see that here was somebody that you could give a brief to in relation to a major escape. It was one of the biggest IRA escape, or the biggest thing that the IRA were going to do inside prisons and in the north, like in the history of the conflict. It was the biggest thing they were going to do. And you knew rightly that you could give Seamus the role that he was going to play, run over it with him, and then go away and concentrate on something else, because you knew that you didn't have to. While other people you would sort of have to make doubly sure that so and so knows precisely and double check that he's okay. You didn't have to do that with him. You give him the brief, you ran over it, and then closer to the time, obviously there was a run over with everybody, but you knew that he was focused. You knew that he internalized his role. You also knew that he understood not just the military implications of what we were doing, but the political implications of what we were going to do, because he knew it would have a big, major impact on the political life in the 6 counties. So for me, I mean, I became very, very friendly with him, and I mean, obviously during and aftermath of the escape, became pretty close to him. So I mean, that period of months running up to the escape, it was just a general familiarisation between myself and Seamus, and the likes of Bobby Story, Jerry Kelly, and people like that, you know, coming together and chatting about things. So you knew you had someone who was focused, and you knew you could totally and absolutely rely on him not to let you down on one jot of what was expected.
People have said that after they burst out of the jail, prisoners started to hijack cars and vans belonging to people living in the area. One man spoke of seeing at least 10 men packed into one hijacked car, their arms and legs hanging out of the windows. Prison staff also ordered the same man to tail the fleeing prisoners, but they got away. Other people spoke of seeing troops opening fire.
It is a very grave incident indeed, the most serious in our prison history. The Secretary of State, Jim Pryor, has set up an inquiry.
So, as I said, they went off in different directions, and at the top of the hill, it's not that big a field, you know, and we were all training and playing football, but I just felt going up that field, my legs were heavy. There's a gully at the top of it, and it goes down about 15, 20 feet in a bit of a slope, and up the other side, and there's a gradual slope down to a road, and up on the left of that road, there's a laneway that leads up to a farm, Dixon's farm. So we were all charging up that road. Loads of the lads ran up into the farm, and as I hit the roadway, the first load that had gone up, there was actually 12 of them in a Hillman Avenger driving down the road. There was legs sticking out the back. Spanner Campbell was driving, and he actually was trying to slow down, and somebody shouldn't get in, and I was saying, there's no way am I getting in there, and somebody shouted, there's another car up there. So I ran on up, and when I get into the courtyard, Seamus had got there in front of me, and there was Seamus, and I think it might have been Marcus Murray and Marty McManus were looking at a Volkswagen van, one of these Volkswagen vans, which would accommodate all sorts of people. And there was this automatic Mercedes 1800 saloon sitting there. So we ran into the house, got the keys of everything, and there was a young fella about 15, nobody else about, so we just hijacked the two vehicles. So I took the keys and ran out and jumped into the driver's seat. The boys were piling in behind me. And of this distinct recollection, Seamus was halfway between the Merc and the Volkswagen. And every time I think back on it, 12 Republicans ploughed into the back of a Hillman Avenger and all crushed into it. Right? 8 of us get into a Mercedes saloon, and only 2 took this van. You could have put everybody into the back of the van comfortably, and only 2. No, the logic of it, and this was only a couple of guys could drive, and you know, whatever. So, and I was shouting at him, you know, And I was starting, I had to get the wheel out to show me how, because I couldn't drive an automatic. How do you do this? So he actually showed me. I was right, everybody's in. There was about 6 more piling in behind me. And I says to Seamus, what are you doing? And he's halfway between me and the Volkswagen. And I says, you go in the van, you come in the car. And he was sort of hesitant a wee bit, and then he just bolted over and he jumped straight into the back. Jumped right into the back of the car. They were all sitting in the back. And away we went, and we drove off down the road. So we came out and swung left on the road. Now, we knew where we were going with the lorry. If the lorry had come out down the front of the jail and out through where the Brits had a roadblock, but we had a tally system to get through that, and then we would have went off a certain direction to a rendezvous point with the South Armagh Brigade, who were up to pick us up, armed with 50 caliber machine guns, 30 caliber, a whole array in a couple of vans. They were going to pick us up and bring us into South Armagh. This was all part of the plan. But I'd come out somewhere and I hadn't a clue what direction I was going in. The familiarisation there, I knew where I was at the other side of the camp. We were now at the other end of it, and it just wasn't familiar. And what I needed to do was to get up onto the main road and get somewhere towards the Moira roundabout. If you'd have pointed me in the Moira roundabout and then blinded full to me, I'd have drove you to Cork, with no problem. So Seamus was saying, and Seamus was the only one of the 8 people in that mark who was from the countryside. Everybody else was either from cities or towns. There was nobody involved in the IRA in that wagon, in that car, who was involved out in the countryside and operating against the Brits. We were all involved in cities and towns. So there was no field craft amongst us for being out and about in the countryside. So everybody said, what are we going to do? And I said, right up onto the carriageway. And we ended up, there was a couple of women coming up the other side of the road and we sort of slowed down. Excuse me, ma'am, could you tell me the direction to the Moira roundabout? And I don't know whether they were going to Sunday afternoon service or whatever, but they're well dressed and they're looking into the car, and there's a bunch of rough looking. They were all young, I was over in the 30 mark, right? We're all young lads, right? And I would have been one of the older ones. Most of the rest of them younger than me, right down to early 20s, 21 or 22. And some of them rough looking. And we're sort of looking. Anyway, we drove along onto the carriageway, dual carriageway, and then we headed off, and there's UDR Jeep come flying up, 2 UDR Jeeps on the other side come flying up past us. And I was saying to the boys, look, there's 8 of us in this, try and keep down a wee bit, just in case somebody drives up past who's military or peelers or whatever, and they look, 8 people in the car, whoa, that's not allowed, so just try and sink down a wee bit. So they were crouched down a wee bit in the back and flying down the road, and I says, right, somebody says, try and get the such and such and such. I says, look, they're going to have roadblocks as soon as they can. They'll have roadblocks so many miles out, 5 miles out, 10 miles out, and all these main roads they're going to just throw a couple of jeeps on them. And Seamus says to me, just leaned over, he says, listen, lose this car. I says, lose the car, get rid of the car from the face of the earth. He says, we need to go to the fields, we need to go to ground. He says, because you're not going to get from here to the border during daylight with us. I says, right. So the first opportunity I got, I swung off this road, and we ended up on a country lane. We ended up here, as the crow flies, no more than 4 miles from the jail. And we're driving up this country lane. I said, what are you doing? He says, we should take over somewhere and get in. Right, okay. And I was sort of in the back of my head, I was saying, well, this guy knows the countryside. He's the only one, so he knows what he's talking about. And he's been, because I'd known that he's been at it from, he was actually at it when he was about 14 or 15, out around the countryside, so he had a wealth of experience for a very, very young man. So I said, right, I'll take this boy, because I'd known him over the previous lot of months, and I'd been impressed by the way that he was clinical about what he was doing.
Meanwhile, McFarlane, with another group of escapees, had taken over a house near Drumore and held a couple and their 3 children hostage.
Now, this family, obviously, totally and absolutely racked, that these right in on top of them. So Seamus says, if I can get rid of this car, be a bonus. So we searched the house, and when we went through the side, there was a work shed, which was part of the house, and the big doors on it, like lift up garage doors. So we arranged everything. He didn't park his car in there because there was big fridges and stuff, and we pushed everything to the back of it, opened it up, drove the car in, and left us about that much space to close the door. So to all intents and purposes, If a helicopter hovered over the house, they wouldn't know you were there. Did they make it the coroner? So we just drove the car in, locked it up, went into the house and settled down and put people at vantage points. This was around 5 o'clock or so in the afternoon. So we decided that we needed to stay there until it got dark, because people moving about in droves during the daylight. Helicopter comes over, you're snookered. So Seamus and Blute and myself went upstairs and we got a map. Countryside map, right? A map of the north, a map of Ireland. And we went upstairs and we sat down and I said to Seamus, what do you reckon? He says, we need to walk the fields, we need to walk it at night time and dig in during the day. He says, we need to walk to the border. He says, you have two options. And I says, well, what do you reckon? I says, well, we're supposed to be going, I says, to South Armagh. See where I am now? There's no way. Firstly, there's no way they're going to be at the rendezvous point. They'll be away. Although I found out later days that they stayed an hour and a half over what they should have stayed. Inside cordons of all sorts of things, activity with helicopters flying everywhere. And they actually arrested a guy who was curious about where they parked and was walking up and down with his dog and looking, and one of the boys had radioed some of the boys in the back of the van. Oh, there's a boy here giving us a bit of, what did we do? Next time he was up, pull him in. So him, dog and all, he just come up, van slid open, he got pulled in. And afterwards he was able, they knew, he was elderly, like he was in his 60s, they knew that he must have been a military man. He was very, very crisp English type of accent, you know, so something sort of major or something. He was able to describe the weaponry in the back of the van to the Brits afterwards in detail, you know, precise, such and such a caliber of blah blah blah. See, the only way that I can see of securing the safety of the people with me, so that you don't inform any authorities, I says, is to take the eldest boy with us. And her face turned pure white. I says, no harm to him. But, you know, she didn't get into the logic, we're going to have to drop him off somewhere. And you couldn't have done that anyway. But that's not the point, you had to issue the threat. And I says, so what I want you to do is bear in mind that's the only way that we can get out of here, so that I know that you're not going to lift the phone, because that's a lever. I says, now you go in and talk to them too. Seamus and Blute come back after about 15 minutes and says that this woman says she wants you to come in and she wants to get the Bible out in front of you, and she wants to put her families, because they're Christian people and their word is their bind, and she wants to put their hands in the Bible and swear that they won't go near the pillars, provided that you give your word as a Republican that you won't take anybody from the house. So you're caught, what do you do? So I says to Seamus, what do you reckon? He says, right, no problem. Oh, he says, by the way, that's 72 hours. I says, what? He says, I've agreed for 72 hours, provided you are good to your word. Here's me, happy days. You know, I wasn't expecting that. So Seamus was laughing and Blute was, you know, giving a thumbs up. So went into the kitchen again with Seamus, and the three of us went in with the mum. And she got all the family on the Bible. Right? Now we didn't ask them to do this, she offered, you know, as proof of their word as Christian people. And I says, look, well, no problem, that's okay. And she says, now you tell me that you give me your solemn oath when you leave here, the 8 of you will leave and there'll be nobody else out of this house with you. And I says, well, I'll stand over that, and there's no harm will come to anybody. When we leave, you'll never see us again, and your family will be staying overnight. I says, do you want to stay in the same room at night, or do you want, because we'll be here? I told them we'd be going the early hours of the morning, so they wanted to go and told them all to use the bathroom and stuff, and we loaded up with bits and pieces of food and water and bottles of juice and whatever we needed. And they all wanted to stay in the family, and the mother and father's bedroom with all the kids, you know. Well, one or two of the wee lads, 12-year-old and 11-year-old, were sitting chatting with the boys, watching the football, how their favourite team was. So they had got a good, and it's people like Seamus do that, you know. It's having a couple of hours here, easy going. Big Jim Clark actually from Donegal, very easy way of dealing with people, you know. And so they had this eased atmosphere, although the father was just a bundle of nerves. So we let them up to the family room, up to the main bedroom, and we said, look, at some stage of the evening we'll be leaving, but we headed out about 10:30 and cut the telephone wires, and away we went. Now we heard afterwards, at a later stage, that they didn't go near anybody. They went to their minister the next day and told him in the way, same way you go to confession. Told him in confidence of church confidence or religious confidence, the predicament and what I'd done. And he had said to them, well, in faith, if you've given your binding word on the Christian message, and you know, I can't see any difficulty in you staying with your word. So I went to the pillar 72 hours later, and they were livid, because they could have chased it up, like. But by that time we were in South Armagh. So we headed out, and off along the road in single file. Everybody instructed, Seamus had said that, everybody see the first sign of car lights or noise, don't be running around picking your spot. Turn to your right and dive into the ditch, no matter what is in front of you in the ditch. Just get in off the road. So on a number of occasions you jumped over a wall and you realised the wall was about 15 feet high, you know, so you ended up vroom, straight down into a field which you thought was level, it wasn't. So we headed off along the road, and we were keeping to the fields until about 1 o'clock. We actually travelled a road to make quick distance from there going southwards. We actually travelled a road between 11 o'clock and 12 o'clock, and then jumping in the ditches if there was traffic. And then Seamus says, well, we'll get into fields then just for about, we travelled about half an hour on the roads till we get across away from the immediate area, and then we went across fields, and we'd heard a helicopter up, and then all of a sudden this sort of light drizzle and mist came down. And it was like a blessing, you know, so that it had to take off. It couldn't stay up in the mist, you see, and it was pointless, you're not going to see anything. And away we went, and then Seamus brought us through all sorts of fields, and you'd see him going up through a field, you know, and this is after about an hour or two walking through a field, and he'd be standing and he's walking up and down along. Like, what? Yeah, but Jesus is he doing, you know? Right, here. I says, here, what? He says, we're going through here. I says, why not just go through down there where you were at first? Oh, you look for the weak spot in the hedge. I said, what weak spot in the hedge? He said, well, see, you boys not being from the country, you just wouldn't know how to go through a hedge without pulling the ringers under. He says, there's obviously certain hedges have wee weaker. So that's what he was doing the whole evening, getting you up and getting you through where it was easier instead of all sorts of brambles and briars. So he brought us through that, and then we decided to get out on the roadway about 2 o'clock in the morning, and you'd walk until near daylight coming up. So the first night it was just constant trailing and tracking all night long, and then we get in on the side of a hill underneath wind bushes, way up on the side, and we were just lying there. First night was actually first morning, and I remember waking, so I was lying dozing about 7 o'clock in the morning. You hear the birds chirping and cheeping, and absolutely lovely, very mild, and no sunshine. I think it was bright, and total quiet. And we were actually in a barren sort of area between two fields. One field was ploughed, the other field had something in it between these fields. And it's just a whole rough, overgrown section, you know. It could have been about twice the width of this room, but it's just a big long thing. There's all sorts of overgrown brambles, and we get in underneath that. We just lay in there, had a bit of breakfast. I had a radio with us, switched on the news, and listened to the reports at 7 o'clock in the morning. And we were to stay there all day, just totally quiet. Socks hanging up, drying out from the night before, and then all of a sudden I hears a dog barking. Jesus Christ. And this dog come running up, you could see it through the thing in the field, and two guys come walking up, and one of them had a .22 rifle. Right? They were hunting foxes or something, I don't know what they were doing. The dog was barking and yelling, everybody was just totally quiet. And the dog never come over. Didn't come over to us, just went on, running about the field, because it was anxious to be with the owner and bouncing about, and you could see it, and there were no more than about within 50 yards of us going through that field, and you could see through the undergrowth, you know. They couldn't see us. So everybody's totally quiet. Away they went. We waited till about 8 o'clock, 7 or 8 o'clock, once we got dusk, and away again. Over fields and all that. Yeah, not used to this sort of stuff. Totally, absolutely knackered, just dreamed.
Sentenced in, I think it was 1982 to 30 years, and the judge recommended that he'd spend all 30 years in prison. But one of the things that Seamus said to me, that when I first met him, when he came out, and he said it with a bit of a joke, he said they sentenced me to 30 years and I stayed 30 months. And I thought it stuck in my mind. But again, I wasn't surprised to hear that Seamus was on the 1983 escape. Again, I was in Cloners. It was a Sunday. I was in another house. Another news flash came on and said that there had been a major prison escape out of Longcash, and it became massive news. As we all know, it was the biggest prison escape in British penal history. One of the news has said that a senior area man who was captured from the Monaghan area was one of those who was missing. So we were overjoyed at that. Obviously, we knew Seamus was on his way back, but there was a number of days went by, there was no news, there was a lot of rumours. The names of the people who were actually captured were actually starting to filter out as well. There was another local man, Marcus Murray, who was arrested with Seamus that morning in Rosslea. He was captured some 20 miles from the prison. So it was, people were still very apprehensive, waiting to see what would happen. There was no news coming, days went by. So I was down in another county about 10 days later, and a friend of mine says, there's somebody in the area and no doubt you'd like to see who it is. And he told me it was Seamus, and that he had successfully made his way across the border. So we went up to see him, and this was the first time I had met him. And the other person who was with him, whom I had never met before, was Bick McFarlane. And Bick had been well known from his period and his role in the 1981 hunger striker as the OC of the prison. And obviously Seamus was over the moon. I remember he was sitting at the table, he was eating something, but he was always eating something because he had a fantastic appetite, and he was a great man for chocolate. The lads in prison was telling me that when I went to prison myself, that Seamus used to spend all his tuck shop money in one day, and he'd just eat all the chocolate, and he'd be around begging for chocolate the next day. So he was a fantastic man for his grub. So he jumped up from the table and he came over and he shook hands with me. He says, once we're finished here, he says, we'll go up here and we'll start the planning. And Bick McFarlane said to me afterwards, he says, I was excluded from that, but the 2 years were just getting into where things go from here. I think what the word Seamus said to me was, where we start from here. Obviously, I was hoping to get a good yarn with him, talk to him about the 2.5 years that he had been missing, how things had moved on. So I spent a number of weeks meeting Seamus, talking to him. But the one thing that struck me very clearly, this was a changed man. Obviously, he was the same guy, he looked the same, not very much older looking, but in his thinking, he had definitely changed. Prison had changed him.
Pauline, it must have been difficult to conduct a relationship in the midst of a war.
Well, it depends on what one calls a normal relationship. I personally think that it was difficult for everybody to conduct a relationship during the war. Sitting at checkpoints and running into foot patrols when you were going out on socialising was hardly a normal relationship or a normal environment for any relationship. Seamus and I didn't consider our relationship unusual. Obviously there was periods of time that I didn't see Seamus, and when I did see him I had to travel to safe houses. I had to be extra careful and conscious that I wasn't being followed, and conscious for Seamus's personal security, which was the utmost of importance. Seamus was ever conscious of the safe houses that he stayed in and the good people that kept him, and he'd never have put their being clean at risk or abused their goodwill. These good people had enough hardship without the attention of the special branch, and Seamus was ever conscious of this. We didn't go to dances or discos or go to bars, which was quite normal in a regular relationship. Well, we did have a long weekend in Cork at one period. It much a novelty for me as it was for Seamus. Travelling on the train, eating out, going for a pint and just walking the streets of Cork in the rain. Being in the open was a wonder for Seamus. It was normal life for a change. Walking into a shop buying the newspaper, Seamus was just like a child, and for me to watch Seamus having a normal weekend was inspirational.
Obviously, 26th of April 1986 is etched in a lot of people's minds. That was the day that Seamus was killed by undercover British soldiers of the SAS, and it's obviously etched in my mind as well because I was on active service with him that particular morning, and sometimes it has been something that has been going through my mind for almost now 20 years, thinking about those last moments with him. And I hadn't seen Seamus for something like 6 weeks before the day before, when I met him in a house, and he had been away, and he was only back in the area, and there was an operation planned against the occupying forces in the Rosslea area, and I had said to him that I needed him to come on this because the personnel was scarce at that time for other reasons, and obviously he said no bother, he would come, he'd come that day, and I met him on the Friday night, and we talked over the operation and where it was. He knew the area quite well himself, so we walked to we intended to walk to the place. So we left a safe house outside Cloners at about 1 o'clock on the Saturday morning, just past midnight, and we walked across the fields towards Rosslea, which was on the main road, about a mile outside on the Lisnaskea road we were going. And it was a very quiet night. We actually were in time. We actually sat down at a place, and I needed to discuss a few things with him because we hadn't seen him for quite a while, and we talked over things, and then we headed on our way towards the point where we were destined to go to. So we emerged towards the point, and everything seemed to be okay. It was a very, very still night. It was the middle of the night. There was no noises. So, but as with every operation or an active service, we approached the point very, very carefully in case that there was anything untoward. But anyhow, there wasn't that we could ascertain, and we walked towards the very point that we were going to. I had said to Seamus, I think everything's okay here, and I emerged over, began to step across a hedge. He was standing behind me, and just as I put my foot across the ditch, just in front of me, 3 weapons opened up and on automatic fire. Only about 15 feet away that these 3 people were lying. Obviously, a unit, undercover unit of the SAS, had been actually within ear distance, probably could hear what we were saying. We were so close to them. So immediately I knew here was an ambush. There was no time to think. I actually turned, lifted my foot back across the ditch, turned and headed up the field. And just as I turned, Seamus was also hit. I knew I was badly wounded too, because as I was escaping up the field, I was almost on the point of collapsing. But as I did run up the field, another unit of the SAS opened fire from another corner of the field, and actually then they hit me in the leg, and it broke my leg, and I still kept going on. I came to a gap, and I went out through the gap and up along the hedge, and after about 10 or 15 minutes I could hear the soldiers obviously coming through the ditches, because they were closing in, and the way I viewed it at that stage was that I was still within 100 yards of the incident where we were first ambushed, and this was it. There was no way that it wasn't going to be found. But they found Seamus first. Seamus is in a different field from myself, and I could hear them talking to him, and there was raised voices, and they seemed to be shouting at him. Now, I don't know whether he was alive or dead at this stage, but I take it that he was still alive, because they wouldn't have been talking to him. So after a couple of minutes anyway, I heard 3 single shots, and I knew Seamus had been assassinated by these people. And I remember lying there thinking, I'm the only person in Ireland out from these people who knows that Seamus is now dead, and it was only a matter of time that I would have the same fate. And I remember thinking it would have been better to have died in the first hail of bullets than having to go through that bit of a torture with these people finding me, and there was no mercy, shooting Republicans dead. So I lay there a number of hours, and they were searching the area. There was no other forces in the area, just the SAS. There was didn't seem to be any other backup forces, and they seemed to have went away to search the area that they had watched Seamus and myself emerge from, because it later came out within the depositions, in my court depositions, that they had night sights and they had watched us for a number of 100 yards as we approached the point, and they must have went back thinking that I went back in that direction, so they were searching for me. I actually heard them coming up the back of the ditch. I'm on one side of the ditch, and they are walking up the other side, and they were briefing others who had come as backup, because I seen a truck came up. I was laying on the side of a lane, and this truck came up the lane and stopped something like 50 metres from where I was, and a number of soldiers jumped out and joined those who had done the shooting, and I could hear them saying, there's at least another gunman in the area, and we believe he's wounded. And they were just walking within yards of where I was lying, and I thought it's only a matter of time before they will find me. But darkness became daylight, and the sun began. It was a beautiful morning. As I was lying there, I was beginning to get more weaker, because I knew the only wound I could see was on my hand, but I knew I had serious wounds in the rest of my body. So after a couple of hours, they all came back to the truck, and they were walking around the truck, and I could actually see them, and I could see the ones that had actually done the shooting. They had massive big backpacks on them. They were mostly dressed in military uniform, and they then left the scene. Some 10 or 15 minutes later, 2 helicopters arrived and started flying overhead, and I was laying on a hill and I could see down towards the road, and there was something like 200 to 300 police, RUC, British Army, emerging up the field, coming up walking in a line, and I knew it was only a matter of time that I was going to be captured. And in fact, I was hoping to be captured, because I knew that I wouldn't survive much longer with the wounds that I had. So as the soldier came up, with a dog, and he walked to where the point of the shooting took place, which was something only like 100 metres, and the dog walked straight to where I was, and I was captured, and it was a British soldier there. He took out a gun, he pointed it at me, and he said to me, he shouted to all the others in the field, I found a man, and he said to me, "You're wounded," and I remember saying, it was in my deposition, "I'm riddled," and he said that he was going down to the road, that there was a medical officer, and he would bring the medical officer back up, and he left, but as soon as he left, a number of RUC men came, and immediately they recognised who I was, and they began to, I had actually no pain. I was laying there for a couple of hours and no pain whatsoever, but as soon as they actually moved me, I thought that my back was broken. The pain, I have never in my life experienced pain like it. So they began to kick at me. They rolled me over. One RUC man, actually with a big pair of boots on him, he put his foot underneath my chin, and he put the gun down, right down, and he squeezed it there, and he said something like, "What is it like now, Lynch, to look from the other end of one of these things?" And I felt saying to him, yeah, you're not man enough to pull the trigger, but I knew, don't say those things, because they can just pull the trigger and then get away with it, particularly somebody like myself who was on active service. There would be absolutely no problem with them saying that I made a gesture, even though I wasn't able to even lift my hand. So the British soldier came back. He had a medical officer with him, and the medical officer said to the RUC man straight, he says, "You shouldn't treat anybody like that in that condition." And he says, "Would you, like one of your men, treat it if they were severely wounded?" And he asked them to lift me out of the hedge onto the road, and this wee lane ran alongside where I was lying. And one of the things that saved me that night was that I had a complete green uniform on me, and if I had had a pair of blue jeans like this today, they would have spotted me, the SAS men, because there was one SAS man stood for 2 hours beside a vehicle, and he was whistling and he was walking about, and if he had looked up the field and I had had a pair of blue jeans on me, he'd have spotted me. But I blended into the hedge because I had a uniform on me. But anyhow, the medical officer asked the RUC men to lift me out of the hedge very, very carefully, and they placed, so they did, and they placed me on the concrete lane, and I remember feeling I was never as cold in my life. Again, I had lost a lot of blood. But he proceeded to fix my leg. He put a splint on my leg, and also bandaged up my intestines, almost hanging out, because I had severe injuries along my stomach. And then he asked for a helicopter to bring me to hospital, and they refused. The RUC men saying no, so we'll bring him in an ambulance. And I remember one of them saying, "So he'll be DOE by the time he arrives at Enniskillen Hospital." But the medical officer demanded that a helicopter be brought in and take me to hospital. And there was 2 helicopters in the area. Those in charge refused to allow either helicopter to be used. So he sent for another one, and it came from Omagh, and the helicopter landed beside us. Once the helicopter arrived, I was placed on the centre, down the centre of it, and the RUC men jumped in, and when they were getting in, they walked straight down my body. I always remember they were out of sight of the medical officer, so they emerged into the helicopter first, and they walked. I was lying flat down on the floor, and they actually walked with their big boots right on top of my body.
Belfast prison 3 years ago, was preparing an ambush at the time. They believe that he'd been responsible for many terrorist killings.
The Provisional IRA outmanoeuvred the Irish police by arranging their honour salute at the remote farmhouse, which is the McElwaine family home. The masked IRA volunteers paraded beside the open coffin, pulling out 3 revolvers to fire a volley of shots, while the Sinn Féin president, Gerry Adams, watched in the background. Seamus McElwaine was a notorious IRA gunman. He escaped from the Maze prison while serving life sentences for 2 murders. Intelligence sources said he led an IRA gang in the border area. Sinn Féin leaders Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness mourned him as a freedom fighter. Some villagers saluted as the funeral cortege, still escorted by the paramilitary honour guard, slowly moved through the Monaghan border countryside towards Scottstown. Thousands followed the coffin on the 3-mile journey, but despite firm government orders, the Irish police had been outflanked. Mourners formed a chain 3 men deep to protect the IRA men escorting the coffin. Silently, they filed past a line of Irish riot police at the churchyard gates, policemen who were powerless to intervene without the possibility of serious disorder.
Hearing the news of Seamus's death was very traumatic. I had actually been staying in a friend's house in a little village, Timor, when it come on the news that morning that a volunteer had been shot in Rosslea. In the 80s there was so much death and pain and prison and loss and grief. It was almost part of existence then. We were all part of that phase of the struggle, and yeah, I suppose we're all marked by it. I suppose too that I, like a lot of Republicans that lost somebody that was very close to us, we still hold their mother at arm's length, and even to this present day, all them years later. When Seamus was killed on active service, it broke many's a heart. The people of the border lost a son, and that's what he had become to many of them. And we lost a special, unique friend.
Seamus McElwaine, IRA volunteer, freedom fighter and patriot is home. Bunyani, Gia Trogra, Aaron Adam. Mr. and Mrs. McElwaine, you loved your son, and we loved your son. We will all miss him.
Just reported that in an undercover operation by the SAS, and it kept the area. And the first person came into my head was Seamus. Now, I didn't know it was him. I didn't know until either later that day or the following day, right? But that's the first person's name came into my head. Now, obviously, people like Francie McGarl and Sean Lynch's names, they were, and different ones, you know, but Seamus's name came flying into my head. I just had this awful feeling, you know, that, Jesus, you know, I hope not. But I knew. The feeling that I had was I knew that the person who was killed was somebody that I knew and that I knew well, and Seamus was uppermost in my head. And they said 1 man killed and 1 man wounded, and they went through the whole thing, and devastated. And then when I heard there was him, it was just, you know, I was wrecked. And I know the people of that area had the utmost respect and admiration for him, especially because everybody knows that he was out in them fields when he was 15 years of age. And I just felt so sad, and I felt so proud to have known him and to be with him, especially during that escape and in the aftermath of it. You know, we became very, very good friends.
So, in a sense, I was actually motivated by Seamus about his life, what he stood for, his convictions and all of that. And I have no doubt that if it had been the other way around, he would have felt the same about myself. I remember getting out of prison and going to see his family, and that was always in my mind. I had met members of Seamus's family in prison that had come up to see me, but I had never met James or May. And I remember getting out in parole and bracing myself because it brought everything back. I was going to meet his parents for the first time from the incident, and it was still fresh in their minds, obviously, and it was still fresh in my mind. It was like happening the day before.